80 years on, can the United Nations deliver justice and accountability for the victims of genocide and crimes against humanity? We ask the President of the UN General Assembly.
We have to accept reality as it is. The Charter gave 5 member states a special right, and they have to be remembered that this is not only a right, but it was a responsibility to defend peace and security. And obviously, some of them are using it not in favor of peace and security. And therefore, we are sometimes paralyzed.
Annalena Baerbock on restoring trust in the UN system. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. In September 2025, the United Nations General Assembly held its 80th session under the leadership of its newly elected president, Annalena Baerbock. She urged all 193 member states to work together on global challenges, including war, poverty, and climate change. Baerbock, a former German foreign minister, emphasized that the General Assembly should act when permanent members of the UN Security Council use their veto power to block decisions. She proposed reforming the Security Council to give African and Latin American nations more representation. She also urged a more transparent selection process for the next Secretary General, hoping the UN will, for the first time, appoint a woman to lead the organization. Annalena Baerbock joins us now from UN headquarters in New York. Madam President, at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, you said, quote, "Instead of celebrating, one might ask, where is the United Nations, which was created to save us from hell?" It sounds like an indictment. Was it?
It still is. The United Nations is needed more than ever. However, the United Nations is under heavy pressure, politically and financially. And therefore, this was a wake-up call for all heads of states to really engage in the current reform process and also to ask themselves every time, what can my country, contribute to the United Nations? Because if we see a crisis around the world, it's not that the UN as such has felt that the Charter of the United Nations is not clear enough, that there should not be a war of aggression or that you have to deliver food in times of crises, but it's single member states who are not living up to this Charter. And therefore, the engagement of every single country around the world is heavily needed in this geopolitically very shaky times.
It sounds like an admission, obviously, that the United Nations isn't living up to its charter, to its core values, to the aspirations of the vast majority of the United Nations member states. Who do you blame mostly for the failures of the United Nations? Is it the permanent 5 Security Council members?
It's about those member states which are in fundamental breach of the Charter of the United Nations. I'm the president of 193 member states, and they are as diverse as our world is, which is wonderful because we learn from each other every day. But if a few are breaching with the fundamental rules of this world, then most of the countries cannot sleep in silence anymore, because if you're not safe that your neighbor would not invade you the other day and the rest of the world would just stay silent, then every country would be in danger. And therefore, for me, it was so important to underline crystal clear that not a single day this world would be better off without the United Nations, but also that the United Nations cannot survive another 8 decades if member states would not engage more to defend the international order, the Charter of the United Nations, and also the international humanitarian and human rights system.
To many, the United Nations is little more than a tool in the hands of the most powerful nations in the Security Council. Clearly, the UN does not, perhaps never really has, reflected the will of the 193 member states. Is that how you see it?
No, because I always tend to give practical examples as well. I mean, we are all living in families. And when did you have a day where your whole family, aunts and uncles, parents and nieces, agreed even like on the same dinner wishes at night? The United Nations is not about that everybody wants 100% exactly the same, not 193 member states, but it's about that you agree on the core principles, that peace and security is the most important thing for everybody, that without sustainable development, so delivering on the SDGs, social progress, and without human rights, there will never be peace and security. And for that, you need a vast majority. The vast majority has made crystal clear also in the last months that they do not accept an invasion of another countries, that they call for humanitarian assistance not to be weaponized in wartime situation, that every country in the world and the people of every country have the right to live in their own state in dignity and do their own choices as well. But obviously the elephant in the room is the Security Council. You were mentioning it with the P5, the permanent members, and we have a system where a single country can have a veto in the Security Council, and by that blocking others. But the positive in all the challenges is,
Hold on, Madam President. When you talk about a few powerful countries, and in the last 2 years, we've seen the United States more than anyone else use its veto to block Security Council resolutions, ceasefires in Gaza. Do you believe that the time has come to change the rules of engagement within the Security Council when the lives of so many are at risk?
Then the United Nations cannot stay silent. And there are two parts to your answer. First of all, the majority of the members was not silent. There has been the veto many times, as you mentioned, but remember in September, when I welcomed here in New York all heads of state, we had as a first meeting point, even before the official opening, the two states conference called on by France and Saudi Arabia. So it was not all member states participating in that, but more than 140 states came to that conference. They adopted a resolution, the so-called New York Declaration resolutions, which was crystal clear in the points you mentioned, that there has to be humanitarian access to the people of Gaza, that there has to be a ceasefire, that there has to be the release of the hostages, that the people of Palestine have a right to live in their own state, that peace in Gaza is also crucial for peace and security in Israel. And after this conference, some things has changed, because obviously also by then the US president re-engaged in this process and invited other member states, and then the peace summit followed as well. So this is one of the best examples that if the majority of member states does not give up, but even in the darkest hours says, we take up our responsibility, they can put things into rolling. The other part of the answer is we have to accept reality as it is. The Charter gave 5 member states a special right, and they have to be remembered that this is not only a right, but it was a responsibility to defend peace and security. And obviously, some of them are using it not in favor of peace and security. And therefore, we are sometimes paralyzed. And this is why I said also as a president, member states cannot accept that the single action of a few will bring the whole United Nations in discredit. And therefore, there have been already reform steps. For example, the veto initiative, that the member states who calls for a veto, in that case, the United States, had to explain their action in front of the whole membership. And this also brought some movement. Same goes for Russia with regard of the invasion in Ukraine. Obviously, this is not perfect. And this is also why I cited one of the first Secretary General. United Nations is not about the perfect world. It's about preventing humanity from hell. And this is why we have to try to do exactly that, preventing hell every single day, even though sometimes you might not really see the end of the tunnel. But in that case, we have seen that things at least got better with the ceasefire, even though the ceasefire turned out also to be not the most stable one.
It's been violated repeatedly. But let me just mention this as well, something you wrote as you reflected on the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. You said the UN is, quote, a story of people who endure unimaginable suffering in conflicts. People like those you met at a UN refugee camp in South Sudan, or those you met on your many visits to Ukraine. These are the people the UN was built for 80 years ago, you wrote. You barely mentioned the people of Gaza. Was that an oversight?
No, I mentioned it many, many times. I was even criticized when I was a foreign minister. I think this is a critique which unfortunately always goes often to women, that I was speaking too often about women and children and describing their messages. And in one of my key speeches here at the opening of the session, I was remembering of the girl who was shot in the car on the phone, actually, with emergencies helping coming to her, to giving her a voice again. I was quoting and holding up pictures of Palestinian people from their destroyed school, because I think this is also the role of the United Nations, and therefore also for the president, to give the voices of the unseen and unheard to the world and to deliver them. And always remember also heads of government. Imagine these were your children in the rubbles of Gaza, with the parents being killed, wandering alone. And on the other hand, I was always remembering and referring to the children I have also seen and met whose parents have been kidnapped by Hamas, because this is for me also my obligation to underline that humanity is indivisible, that human rights count for all, and that we do not have to choose, thanks God, between are we standing on this side or on that side. We are standing on the side of humanities, and there's one wonderful quote saying, there is no Christian blood, there's no Muslim blood, there is only human blood.
But
And
Ms.
this
Baerbock,
is what we have to deliver on.
allow me to say that for the vast majority of people, certainly people in the global south and people who care about justice for all people, it sounds like empty words in many respects, because it isn't matched by action. And in terms of words, it seems like Western leaders often refer to the suffering of, let's say, girls in Afghanistan, but not often give the same concern for girls in Gaza. The piece I was just referring to, you wrote 5 words in it about Gaza. You just said, Gaza still lies in ruins. Would it have been more useful, more appropriate to say why Gaza lies in ruin, to name the culprit, just like you mentioned Russia's aggression every time you speak about Ukraine?
Well, I do this as well. You asked me in the interview before to not to be too long. This is why I did not quote the whole New York Declaration, which has many, many paragraphs. But I was working also my previous role exactly on this. I was calling on the Israeli government. I was in debates with the Israeli Prime Minister of saying and underlining that humanitarian delivery is not a charity, but this is an obligation of an occupying power to deliver and let in food, water, and life-saving measures, that civilians have to be protected by international law. International law is crystal clear on that. We are debating here in the General Assembly the advisory opinion of the ICJ on the obligations of the state of Israel with regard to occupation in regard of Gaza and the West Bank. I've met with Palestinians who could not reach their olive trees because of the violent settlers. But the point is, as you said, these are only words. But this is important that we speak about it, because if we would just stay silent, then evil would prevail. If good people would stop doing the right thing, calling for the right thing, giving speeches for the right thing, evil would prevail. But on the other hand, we have to see how we get majorities. And this is obviously in these times more difficult if we see again more nationalistic trends. And this is why I'm trying as the president of the General Assembly to build bridges cross-regional. This is why I'm not a fan of saying the West and the South. This is about those countries who believe in the international order, and they come from all continents, and they have to stand up for all continents, because we the people means we the people around the world. Doesn't matter whether they are born in the East or in the West, in the North or in the South.
Yet, Madam President, you were widely criticized, not just in Germany, but elsewhere when you were foreign minister, for refusing to support ceasefire resolutions and for justifying Israeli strikes on civilian targets. How do you respond to criticism that your leadership of the United Nations General Assembly represents the West's double standards, not global principles?
Well, first of all, I don't share this concept of the West and the rest, because as you can also quote, there have been intensive debate in the European Union, and the European Union are in this structure all Western countries. So it's not the West against the rest. And I would also like to ask everybody, and I did it also here, when people are asking me what was with the speech where you were mentioning with regard to the attacks of Israel in Gaza. And for me, this is very important in these polarized times, to not take half of the sentence, but the full sentence. I was making clear, and I would also like to remember when it was back in time, with regard to the protection of civilians, that under humanitarian law, civilians always have to be protected. Full stop. Full stop. This counts for the people in Gaza.
Why did you then say, Madam President, that these protected civilian sites, hospitals, schools, would lose their protected status if Palestinian fighters were hiding there behind civilians? Didn't you in many ways,
this is not my quote.
Justify? I can give you the direct quote, Madam President, and I know you've been asked about this many times. But here's the direct quote. You said, and these comments were made in 2024, you said self-defense means not only attacking terrorists, but destroying them. That is why I have made it so clear when Hamas terrorists hide behind people, behind schools, then we get into these very difficult areas, but we do not shy away from them. That's why I made it clear at the United Nations that civilian locations can lose their protected status because terrorists exploit that. Germany stands by this, and that means for us the safety of Israel. Today, you are President of the General Assembly. Do you still stand by these remarks?
Well, again, you put all together. So let me explain, because I'm crystal clear on international law, that civilians have to be protected. You're not allowed to attack hospitals and schools, nowhere in the world, not in Gaza, not in Germany, not at the Philippines. What I was saying, and I would really like to be asked there as well, that it's not allowed nowhere in the world, neither in Gaza, nor in Germany, nor in the United States, nor at the Philippines, to misuse civilian sites for terrorist activities. A hospital and a school cannot be misused. This does not mean, and this is what I never said, that this gives the right to anybody else.
But we have seen that also like, Madam President. It's important.
I'm sorry.
But that is what it sounded like. It sounded like you were justifying Israel's attacks based on their own pronouncements without any basis in fact.
And this is wrong. And this is why sounded like is something different as if you say you said it. Because I said in many interviews very crystal clear. And why did I have also so many hard discussions with Israeli governments? Because I was always remembering that they are obliged to protect civilians and that you're not allowed to attack civilians. But we have seen also in other wars, and this is so important for me as well. I mean, remember the situation of ISIS with regard to the Yazidi women, where they have forced women into schools. This is a civilian protected site. We have seen also like civilian protection shields in other war situations, that civilians were put on the front lines in order to be protected from whatever soldier around the world. And this is why the upholding of humanitarian law is so important. And this is why I said in many speeches, you cannot cherry pick from humanitarian law. I like this in that situation, and I like that in the other situation. And this was not only me saying this. If you look at the New York Declaration, and again, this is why I don't draw lines between countries, supported by Arab countries, supported by European countries, by many countries around the world. Also, the New York Declaration is calling on Hamas to lay down its weapon, and it's calling on the Israeli forces to withdraw their troops. And I've done exactly the same. I was saying that international humanitarian law counts to every party in war times.
You have frequently stated that Israel has the right to defend itself, although international law, let's be clear, does not grant Israel or any occupying power the right to defend themselves against the occupied people. Do Palestinians, in your view, who live under occupation have the right to defend themselves? And if so, how should the UN General Assembly uphold that right? Do they have the right to defend themselves? Yes or no?
Every person in the world has a right to defend themselves. It starts when you are being attacked on the street. You have the right to defend yourself, even with force. It's the same if you're being tried to by somebody to be raped. There's another person even obliged to help you. And there's no separation between Palestinian people or Israeli people. There's no separation between Latin American people and European people. Every person had the right to protect themselves, and every country has also the right to self-defense themselves. I've also said, and again, I would like to ask in respect to quote always the full time. I was always said that the right to self-defense, which belongs to every country, this is even clear in the Charter of the United Nations, has limits. It has no carte blanche. You have many quotes from my side as that as well. And this is also what I always said to the Israeli government, that the right of self-defense has limits, and this is regulated in the Charter of the United Nations. This is regulated in international humanitarian law. And this is why it's so important that we have international courts dealing with these issues, because they then decide when a crime commits a crime. And again, this is not about single countries, one having more rights than others. Every country has the same right, and every country has the same obligation.
Today, Madam President, when you see Israel's war on Gaza, which many people have called a genocide, continue, do you believe that Israel's actions amount to self-defense?
This war has to stop, and it had to stop way earlier than the ceasefire came into place.
But that's not the question, Madam President.
Every self-defense has limits. And this is why this war had to stop. And it was very important that the United Nations stopped it, because it was way too long and way too many people have been killed. And there's a limit in self-defense.
Palestinians are still being killed, as you know, despite the ceasefire. Do you believe that Israel today is legitimately defending itself? Yes or no?
Now in December, we have seen more than 67 children being killed. So unfortunately, it's a huge drama that the ceasefire is not even a stable ceasefire. This is why the United Nations, which I'm representing, has called on both sides, and especially on Israel, to oblige to the ceasefire, to stop this war, to stop the suffering of civilian people, because self-defense comes to an end, and the world needs peace. The people of Palestinians need peace, and we are in a situation where everybody agreed on ending this war, and this is why Israel and Hamas both have to oblige to this ceasefire.
On the issue of genocide, you recently said, quote, preventing genocide is a shared responsibility. That means every member state, every politician, every diplomat. Genocide anywhere is a threat to peace, security, and human rights everywhere. You called on member states to uphold their obligations under the Genocide Convention to prevent genocide and to ensure accountability when it occurs. Does that include in Gaza? Do you believe there is genocide in Gaza?
As I said, this is up to the courts, and this is why, again, if you would quote my speech in full, I said there are the ongoing investigations from the ICC and also from the ICJ with the obligation, and it's good that we have these courts, because they are exactly there for that, to prevent further escalation of crimes against humanity, of war crimes, and especially of genocide.
But we also have commissions by the United Nations, investigations, including the UN Independent Commission, which released its finding in September, Ms. Baerbock. It found that Israel was committing genocide in Gaza, citing the tens of thousands of civilians killed. As President of the General Assembly, should your position and the language you use reflect the findings of UN reports and investigations? Because you haven't used the word genocide yet.
The President of the General Assembly respects and delivers speeches on behalf of the majority of member states. And therefore, in a situation where member states have not decided on terms or also on topics, it's not the President of the General Assembly to formulate her personal opinion, but citing courts and others, which I did also in that statement.
Madam President, you said this was a make or break moment for the United Nations. What needs to change? What needs to happen? What will you make sure happens during your presidency of the General Assembly for the UN to regain the trust it has lost?
That those countries who believe in international law, not only for themselves, but because they know that that is their life insurance, join forces, do not let themselves being divided by geopolitical fractions, but defend the Charter of the United Nations and the human rights, because this is what this institution was built for, to ensure every day that every person on this world enjoys the fundamental human rights like you and me.
Annalena Baerbock, President of the United Nations General Assembly, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The UN's true test now is not in words, but in action. To act decisively and fairly, to deliver justice and accountability, and to protect the silent victims of genocide and crimes against humanity. As Annalena Baerbock says, the UN should reflect the will of the majority of its member states, not the few that write the rules and decide the global order. Otherwise, the promises it makes will remain empty. That's all from me, Rida Fakhri, and the team. Thanks for watching.